My main research interest lies in social changes. How do people experience social changes and how do they envision them? The focus of my scientific interest in my previous projects was on textile industrial workers, on their experiences of post-socialist and neoliberal changes in Slovenia, and on their memories of socialism. Above all, I was interested in experiences, conceptualizations, and ideologies of work. In the project, Seizing the Future, I again focused on social changes, but this time from a different angle. I was interested in social change, not so much from the past perspective, but more on its relation to the future. How social change relates to the way the future is envisioned and experienced, how a different future is imagined. My attention was on ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that Apod calls the ethics of possibility. Based on my ethnographic material, some of which I will present here, I treat visions as collective hope which steer people's, my interlocutors, activities towards the creation of a different future. I'm interested in what is imaginable and in the power of imagination. I therefore explore future through the way it is imagined in the present. In my research, I pointed at three different visions of the future in Slovenia. The first, the meta-narrative about entrepreneurship, as it is also promoted by national and EU policies. Second, social entrepreneurship. And third, a variety of practices which I refer to as social experimentations. I argue that even though these visions are ideologically very different, certain similarities exist between them. And I will briefly sketch some of them. First, in all the three visions, there was no expectations that social situation would stabilize. Second, all the three of them called for a social change to originate from below, from the people, yet the change was perceived differently. While in the minds of social experimentators and some social entrepreneurs, a change implied a radical transformation, others understood it through self-activation on the market. Third, all of them emphasized the importance of self-activation and action. Despite a variety of interests, orientation, they underline the significance of personal transformation and refer to the mechanisms of self-regulation, self-evaluation, and improvement. Fourth, the common point of all of them was a critique of a state, the legal administrative system. As entrepreneurs, and social experimentators, they all expected more support from state institutions. I treated a meta-narrative and ideology of entrepreneurship as a generator of social development, and social entrepreneurship as institutional agent of social change. In Slovenia, social economy evolved out of distinct grassroots initiatives in the 90s and after 2000. OECD and EU directives, various policies, and national politics also formed social economy. It was institutionalized as social entrepreneurship in 2011. That is why I refer to social entrepreneurship and not to social economy. So the way I refer to social entrepreneurship is very different from the one that Maya mentioned in her paper. After years of media reports and public discussions about post-socialist privatization and corruption, managerial takeovers, poverty and unemployment, impunity of elites, austerity measures, and a growing sentiment of injustice and inequality before the law, social economy and then later social entrepreneurship brought hope to the people that alternative to or in capitalism is possible. That was linked to ethos of trust, solidarity, and joint risk-taking. This was not specific only to Slovenia. It was a global social sentiment of the time, which began to evolve during the process following the financial crisis in 2011-2012. This point was highlighted by Stef Jansen, who claims that protest movements, the so-called Arab Spring and Occupy movement, evoke certain utopian spirits seeking to establish a qualitatively different organization of society and a new way of being. Although such promises were followed by disappointment, Janssen still argues for the importance of hope in political movements and grassroots initiatives, in which hope can be seen as a thirst for a change, as well as a projection of a better future. In Slovenia, such a collective disillusion, which followed the protests and the social entrepreneurship institutionalization, was explained as being exclusive for Slovenia, as once again something failed in Slovenia. I point to this social sentiment because one can hear it often, as also that nothing is possible in Slovenia. And successful stories are usually in the public and media accompanied by a comment that it is possible even in Slovenia. Many of my interlocutors, in particular social experimentators, were angry at the pessimistic judgment and a discouraging future encounter. Such a sentiment illustrates a social context one encounters or within one operates when trying to create something new. And I will get to this sentiment at the end of the paper. In this paper, I will focus on the vision I refer to as social experimentation. With the term, I name distinct self-organized initiatives which share basic values and are oriented toward building a sustainable, just, and inclusive community responsible for the planet, for the next generations, animals, and nature. These initiatives are concerned with future consequences, in particular regarding ecological crisis. They underline ethics of care and the new moral context of obligation and responsibility. Social experimentation involves exploring new forms of work and life and testing them in practice. It involves creating community-based solutions from sustainable parks, eco-village initiatives, NGOs, co-working communities, urban communitarian practices, cooperatives, and so on. They evolved out of the critique with the current social and ecological situation, which is perpetuated by global inequalities and environmental exhaustion, out of the critique of social norms and state institutions, and from the critique of development agenda based on acceleration and growth. One of my interlocutors, Gaia, who is the director of a small ecological NGO, talked about people who strive for social change, sustainability, whose efforts and motivations are based on similar values and internal fire drive. People that I see as part of social experimentation practices do not claim to live outside the system. They present their activities in parallel to the mainstream society. They wish to challenge contemporary ways of life and the hegemonic system. This feeling of parallel worlds was clearly described by Gaia, and I will quote her now. Often I feel I'm on a very fast train that does not know where it's going. For a while, I manage to step out. I breathe and I connect with people. Then I get on the train again with the same people, but we cannot connect in the same manner as we did outside. We act in a completely different field of mind, even though it's the same us. Crossing from one world to another is very important. Only then we can open up, as in the analogy of being outside the train. It seems many of us who strive for redirecting our future maneuver on and off the train, sometimes even unconsciously. End of quote. Social experimentators question their own position in the world. They point at the consequences of their deeds and existence and their predecessors, and to the traces they leave behind, imprinted in the world. Mariana, who works for an NGO called Local Future, dealing with the economics of happiness, she stated, "For me, the majority of things we do has no meaning, or it is even harmful." End of quote. Experimentation is primarily not about ensuring one's own material position, one's own material survival, or improving one's own social position. It addresses the material existence of the planet, yet it is above all about creating a new morality. It demands socially responsible community working towards creating new conditions for a life worth living. Social experiments explore distinct forms of sociality that cannot be fully imagined, but people strive for. These practices encourage active engagement, which also requires personal transformation. Social transformation is interconnected with self-transformation. By changing ourselves, our ways of life, embodied norms and attitudes, we create a different structure and conditionality. The link between social and personal transformation was frequently emphasized by Nara, who exclaimed, "I am my own Guinea pig." I met Nara in 2015 through a platform for degrowth movement in Slovenia. Nara is a writer, a facilitator, but it is also well known for walking barefoot and living in the wild. Interested in bridging the times, as he said, he started a cooperative in a deserted village in Istria with a group of his friends, a polygon to test concepts and ideas in practice, where a sustainable culture could be imagined and invented. These are his words. In the last 2 years, the site changed its name into the Sunny Hill Association. People come to the place to learn, to share, to connect, to explore, to refill, to get inspired and motivated. The site works as a particular space that is produced to offer a potential of a good life, or at least a better life. It is a site of effective engagements. Nara has a special effect on people. Many said that they attended his events because they were interested in him, in all the interesting things he was doing, because of the so-called Nara effect. A philosopher, Juris de Puder, described Nara as avant-garde. For Nara's personal website, he wrote, and I quote him, "I think that because of the combination of the Robinsonian way of life, lucidity, insight into social processes, he is truly unique. He's not only a theoretician, a critique of the system, of our everyday habits infested with capitalist ideology, but also one of the few with a concrete vision of human-friendly alternatives to the current system and way of life. Not only a vision, but also an intricate methodology how to get there. For me, he's also, from the political point of view, a social therapist of the future." End of the quote. Nara sees his life path as a calling. "I didn't choose it, it happened to me," he said. "Impulses come and I react, then steps follow." He described himself as open and sensible to changes, as someone who was shaped by many experiences and people, but above all the Hare Krishna community, where he lived as a monk for 6 years, and a cleaning action, "Let's clean Slovenia in one day." His motivation is not to change economic political models, but our own embodied practices, as he said, to exceed the frames and social normative. According to Nara, social transformation can only come with a self-transformation. We can only change ourselves, our habitual practices. Like Nara, many social experimentators emphasize the necessity to live the difference and not merely talk about it, to theoretically discuss it as a different politics or a way of life. By living a difference in lifestyles and relationships today, one creates a different future. Such understanding is very important because it's not based only on a promise or a declared commitment that you're doing something good for the later, for next generations or a distant future. The change, the difference itself can be sensed in the present experience. It is embodied in different kinds of practices and relationships, sentiments of belonging and social worth. As pointed out by Gaia, you already feel being part of a different kind of community. Gaia manages an ecological NGO with a small group of people who see themselves as initiators of social changes and promoters of bringing sustainability or the principles of sustainable development into practice. Her work is not merely her job, it's her way of life. With her partner, they try to live their life according to the principles of sustainability. For example, Gaia gets her clothes at exchanges. Her food mostly comes from her garden or agriculture cooperative association, for example, Green Circle, which comes directly from eco-farmers. By describing her experience of shopping at the agriculture cooperative, which meet every 2 weeks, Gaia illustrated how to live the future now, and I will quote her. "For me, the worst was on Friday afternoon. It was cold and rainy. I had to get there, to the meeting place, by a car, and I'm always on a bike. it was really so uncomfortable. It would be much easier to go to the nearest grocery store, but I knew why I was doing it. And when I arrived, I immediately felt good. Exchanges happened with people, we chatted. I went from one farm to another. It filled me with an energy. I would like to expand this to a social level. I refer to the event to illustrate how living the future is experienced now. It's not about living for the later, the future is now. End of quote. Gaia's decision to shop at eco-agricultural cooperative instead of a grocery store is based on specific values she lives. The point of her story is not how she understands and practices economy, but to illustrate how she experiences the future. By living practices based on different values now, people feel they're creating a different future. This point was also emphasized by Nara. Future is now is what he wrote in his blog, and I quote him further. Hope is not vanishing even though we are in dark times. To learn the new, we need to unlearn the old, to step out of old patterns, how things ought to be. Not to look for the guilty, but rather to radical responsibility and global activism. The cure for hyper-individualism is not hyper-collectivism. It is understanding what supports and strengthens life. In eco-villages, we believe therein lies the key to living the future today. End of quote. A crisis, for example, financial uncertainty and anxiety, all these states are perceived as a push towards stepping out and taking future in our hands to reclaim it. Such an action is based on a conscious decision and self-activation. However, a decision follows an internal call or an intuition, a discomfort and refusal of the contemporary norms, ways of life, and normality, which is also felt and sensed. Such is also a character of social experimentators' processes of creation. Intuitively, I connect, said Gaia. Then later, retrospectively, we make assessments and evaluate events. Gaia's point was that certain events are seen and perceived as significant ruptures when we look at them from a distance, in retrospection. References to the past are constantly made, and learning from one or other people's experiences also from the past is significant. Gaia's point was also on nurturing a dialogue between a spontaneity, intuition, organic oscillations, and a conscious evaluation and assessment. Social experimentations are based on the conscious break with the present, on a refusal of the future prediction as directed by the contemporary politics and agenda. They are directed toward creating a different social and ecological conditionality, which is not fully imagined but strived for. It is this vision that marks people today. It's linked to specific values, identities, social recognition, belonging, and social worth. Tell us what you're doing so we are all going to be better, says Nara. While such doing includes making, dwelling, and being, the decision for a change is based on doing as an action in Arendt's sense. It's only through action that one gets transformed and another value is born. Usually these initiatives are self-organized or they started as such and practice flat organization that requires a lot of attuning. Nara emphasized that in these organizational forms, communications and social relations are of the key importance. A particular attention must be paid to nurture social dynamics and build inclusive communication. Nara emphasizes social and emotional intelligence. This was the way the Sustainable Park Istro was designed, to test concepts and ideas in practice. As Nara said, we follow good practices and try to implement them into our environment. Then we observe the results. As a writer, I observe our own example, where we are successful and where we are not. End of the quote. Yet at the time of our interview, their experiment, Park Istra, was falling apart due to internal conflicts. Nara was sad and disappointed. He wrote down his sentiments and observation. He saw his role in assessing their experiences to find out what had gone wrong. In an invitation to one of his events, he wrote, and I quote, "We are witnessing a global epidemic of individualism. Communities are disintegrating everywhere. When individuals do come together trying to rebuild communities, they're usually not up to the task. More than 90% of community building attempts fail. End of the quote. To address this problem, NARA co-organized 2 incubators, an international and a national one, with an aim to develop and present tools for sustainable living. Although their community fell apart, a new organization developed with a new group of people, the already mentioned Sunny Hill Association. And NARA claimed that we should not look at these conflicts as experiments failure. We discovered what was not working, he said, and with this we learned something new. NARA's story illustrates that community experiments are exploratory processes, and a failure is interpreted as part of experimentation. Experimentations are not technical exercises. They are constituted by people's endeavors, energy, enthusiasm, as well as their personal interests and ideals. Experimentations produce and distribute hope, but also disappointments and anxiety. They connect people, support them, fill them with energy, open new horizons, sometimes even with aha effect. They are filled with effects, with the power of effect to live otherwise. Social experimentators emphasize that while search for alternatives is serious, it should also be playful. Gaia remarked that these environmental issues are very serious topics, and it's important we take them seriously. We are already on the edge of the decay. Today we are already too late. Yet it is also important that we do not take life all too seriously, that we have some fun. End of the quote. The latter was emphasized by NARA too. Experimentation is about playing with model, structure, behavior. Time pressure is heavy. Playfulness is thus even more important. It's also linked to a way a failure is treated, or at least people wish to treat it, and to social experimentators' fatigue. As Gaia said, it's not enough to talk about the change, the quality of life, you have to live it. It's thus important not to exhaust oneself, something that usually happens. End of the quote. Social experimentation calls for deceleration, for slowing down, but many people I talk to are burnt and exhausted. Gaia continued, it took me some time to figure out that I cannot do everything at once. Every year, I did a step more. I see many things I wish I could do, but I can't do them right now, but I will. Gaia pointed at the self-patience she needs to nurture and cultivate herself. As she said, I need to protect myself, not to be everywhere and not to do all at once, not to demand too much from myself. If I do, I immediately feel the back pain. End of the quote. Many people I talked to were exhausted and burnt out. I will not search for all the reasons, yet I point at some of them. In their everyday life, people are marked and constituted by distinct temporal technologies. In spite of creating and nurturing their vision of a different future in the present and by addressing a distant future, there are deadlines for their projects, deadlines for projects proposals. There is capitalist market time, productive and financial institutions times, routines of state bureaucracy, biological life, and so on. There is an intense sense of a social obligation brought forth by the new morality of social experimentation. I relate social experimentators' fatigue also to their calls for more support, for more supportive environment and social recognition. In spite of their calls for self-activation and critique of the state, my interlocutors expect help and more support from local and state institutions. They long to be heard and socially recognized. To illustrate this point, I will shortly present Marco, who co-founded an organization for intergenerational solidarity named Co-Travelers, which offers transport to elders for free. This is my last case study. Marco bought used car by himself and together with his friends co-founded a voluntary organization to offer transport to elders in an isolated region in Burkini 5 years ago. Co-Travelers' role, as they saw it, was not merely a transport organization. It was social, which involved a change of an attitude towards elders and the way we tackle aging, creating a better life for them, and their integration. Their role was also educational, raising awareness and making a mental, ideological, and habitual change. I emphasize this need and engagement, not to merely organize a service, but to change the mentality and to motivate other people to get involved, because the social and educational aspect is very much present in distinct social experiments. Elders are forgotten, said Marco, but we live longer. Elders are more educated, they will want to do many things in their old age. And the pensions, our generation, we are all precariat, living on minimal wages, or we are self-employed. That will be a catastrophe. Innovative approaches are so much needed. End of the quote. His future vision was his motivation, which drove him further, and also the fact that he was not alone, but working together with his friends. Marco was 33 at the time of our interview, and he finished the studies in the humanities, and he was self-employed as IT professional. As he said, such a job allowed him to volunteer. Co-travelers learned their work by doing it. The major problem lied in finding a proper legal entity for their activity, getting financial or any other form of support. Marco said, and I quote him, "There are so many obstacles, no support. One is very much alone in making this transition from an enthusiastic initiative towards its professionalization. If you start something new, which is based only on enthusiastic initiative, it can't last long. You need so much to get it started to lay down a structure. I hope for more help and support, including from the state." End of the quote. All the people I talked to share Marco's criticism of the state, its legal and administrative form. It does not understand us. It's like, this is what I heard most often. It does not understand us. Its bureaucracy hinders us. There is no support. It just copy-pastes European forms without understanding the concepts. Or it establishes top-down models in parallel to the already existing communities that grew out spontaneously. I heard that in Netherlands, students live in a retirement home if they spend 3 hours a day with the elders, said Marco. I would really like to know if that is possible in Slovenia. I believe there would be 1,000 restrictions if a retirement home came out with such an idea. There is also this fear we have. We fear something new. We fear when it's not clear how it will be. End of the quote. This was another sentiment that was shared by many people I talked to. A fear of the unknown in the future and a lack of self-confidence, which was ascribed to the Slovenian national character. It's also for this reason, for support, motivation, and mobilization, that Gaia identifies good communitarian practices in the field. Thank you. She sees such a map as a document and a proof that it is possible even in Slovenia. I relate to the social sentiment I mentioned at the beginning of the paper. I address the sentiment to illustrate a broader social context within social experiments operate, and also, at least partially, at the cultural understanding of potential possibility social experimentation in Slovenia. Gaia was upset when she talked about the way alternatives are perceived and treated in Slovenia. I quote her. "It's not true that nothing happens, and it's not true that all experiments fail. Even if not all of them succeed, a failure starts something new, a new field of reasoning and reflection, and a new field of imagination." End of quote. And I conclude with that. Thank you.